Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and as always, I'm joined by Jared Nelson and Scott Edberg. You all know, if you've been paying attention, for the last 6 weeks, we've been spending time with our beloved BCOs again. We've covered the courts of the church, we've looked at their jurisdictions, we've worked through the details of sessions and presbyteries and the General Assembly. And today we're beginning something a little new that we're calling Some Assembly Required. We're going to do a walkthrough of the General Assembly in order to give any newcomers an impression of the whole week. And so if you've been to GA before, this may be some review, but we do hope that it'll warm you up for the assembly that's coming in June. In this series, we're going to bring longtime GA attenders on the show to walk us through what to expect on the particular days of the assembly. Today, we're going to look at what happens before the gavel on Monday and Tuesday of the General Assembly week. And to help us out, we're pleased to have an elder with us whose name won't be unknown to anybody at this point, Per Almquist. Per, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. I'm going to turn things over to Jared. He's going to walk us through this discussion, and I get to sit back for once. This is going to be great. I'm really excited about this episode.
All right. Well, we have frequently said on the show, well, Almquist says here or there and quoted you, but some may not know who you are. And so we thought we'd just start with you telling us a little bit about yourself. We'll go through and do personal stuff and then what you've been working on. But first, just tell us a bit about yourself, maybe how you became a Christian, how you became a Presbyterian if you didn't grow up that way, and how you became a polity aficionado.
Well, that one was by mistake or by accident. But grew up in a Christian home. So my story is a covenant story. It's a story of God's covenant faithfulness. My parents are both Christian. My grandparents were all Christian. Going back to about the 1870s, we know the family were all Christian. So grew up with that. Grew up in the church. Did not grow up Presbyterian. My father was in the Air Force, so we moved around all over and found an evangelical church my parents liked wherever we were stationed. So grew up with just a broad evangelical background. But then my dad's last duty station when I was in high school, the church we settled into was a PCA church. This would have been the early 80s in Hampton, Virginia, and that was our introduction to the PCA. And from there, went off to college in Baltimore. Was in the Air Force at the time. They were paying for my schooling and sent me off. And during that time, I became convinced, thought I was supposed to do the Air Force and then do some kind of ministry second career after a career there. But after a time, realized that God was calling into ministry sooner. Inquired about transferring into the chaplain's corps, was denied. Decided that as big as the Air Force was, God was bigger and should follow his plan for my life over theirs. And so was discharged and started thinking about seminary and ministry, and never expected it to be in a parish context in a local church. Thought it was more of an educational context, but figured I should figure out what denomination, where I stood on some of these things. Was attending a Baptist church at school and the PCA church at home. And so just started reading through things. My wife and I were engaged at the time. We started reading through Sproul's Essential Truths of the Christian Faith together to talk about all of the different things and where we both stood as exploring who we were together. And during that time, wrestled through things like baptism and was handed Bettner's Reformed Doctrine of Predestination and came to see that covenant theology stuff really was what I believe Scripture to teach. And that's what drew into the Presbyterian and said, I'm where I'm supposed to be. And I have appreciated that ever since. As I said, the polity thing was kind of sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, so how did you end up, some people may recognize you if they saw a picture of you because you're often sitting up front during GA as one of the parliamentarians. So maybe you can just kind of tell us, how did you end up there?
That was simply Dr. Chappell asked a few years back. The the gentleman who'd been doing the timekeeping for the assembly for a long time was looking to step down from that. And Dr. Chappell came up and asked if I would be willing to take over, and said, sure.
So you were a kind of a polity aficionado a little bit before then. How did that start then?
Yeah, and I think that's where Dr. Chappell's where I came to his mind. That started, as I said, by accident. Not long after being ordained, was young teaching elder in Presbytery, and our representative on RPR, Review of Presbytery Records, term ended, and we needed to appoint somebody else, and nobody wanted to do it. And I said, don't know really what I'm getting into, but I'm willing to do it. Sure, whatever. So got appointed, got sent, opened my mouth once too many times during the meeting, ended up being elected as the vice chair for the following year, which at that time they used as a kind of a chair elect, which they didn't tell me until after they had elected me. And that's how it began. And that really was how I began learning, listening to the guys on the committee as they talked about things, and opened to a broader understanding of church government and what we do. And
yeah. So where are you ministering right now, and any particular challenges or anything that you want to share of challenges in ministering where you're at?
So I pastor a church in northern New England, up in central Maine, Lewiston, Maine. Been here. I planted the church, moved to Maine in 2005. So been here 19 years now. Planted the church in 2007, and I'm still here. They haven't let me out of the corner of the country yet. So it's my community is, every community is unique, but mine is has a number of things. Last year, Barna rated the Portland-Lewiston region as the most secular region in the country. So we have that. Where the church itself is the poorest square mile north of Boston. We've been in an economic depression since 1950. And over the time we've been here, we've made the national news a few times. 15, 20 years ago, it was as we had an influx of Somalian Muslims. We have the highest per capita population of Somalian Muslims in the country. And that was a bumpy road. And then last fall, on October 25th, we experienced the largest mass shooting in Maine state history. As a gentleman struggling with some mental health issues opened fire at two different locations. My house happens to be about halfway between the two, so he probably drove right by the end of my block to get between the two that night.
Wow. Well, on a different subject, then we mentioned your name a lot for a resource. So, can you tell us anything about this resource that you're working on? How did it come about? Is there any plans to get it to more people than just the three of us here?
Sure. Well, what you have is a copy of my doctoral dissertation, which was a commentary on the Book of Church Order. Because of the length, they limited me to just the form of government, so just chapters 1 through 26. But with it, it also has a historical look at how polity, American Presbyterian polity, developed through the centuries, from the very beginning of the Presbytery in the early 18th century through the writing of the first Book of Church Order in 1785, and then all the way on through the Southern Presbyterian Church and the development of the PCA Book of Church Order. That one it's a dissertation. It's not going very far. However, since then have finished out the rest of the Book of Church Order, the rules of discipline, and then the chapters of the Directory for Worship that have full authority. And that is being published as a joint joint work by the AC and CDM, and the hope is to have it out by December of this year. So watch and see. It's in the final stages of editing right now, and then it goes into their pipeline, and we'll go from there.
That's awesome. That is fantastic.
I'm excited.
Yes.
Very exciting. Yeah.
As polity nerds, we're also excited for that too. Especially some of the stuff in the beginning, I think is really good. I hope you include some of that. The stuff on the formulation of the preliminary principles we thought was really interesting, and hadn't found that other places. So, well, how about now we get into a little bit of the main subject that we were looking at today, which is what to expect when you're commissioning, or what you're going to expect when you go to General Assembly. And this might be for people who are going for the first time, or are going to maybe do what we're talking about today for the first time, because some people don't always do the first thing that happens at the General Assembly, which is not the gavel or the election of the moderator or the worship service, but
Or the ice cream social.
Or the ice cream social, or getting swag from the exhibits, but the committees of commissioners. But if you're looking at the schedule, one of the first things that pops up is commissioner registration. So if people are looking at the schedule, that's actually the first thing. So before we do anything, maybe we should say, if you're going for the first time, who can be a commissioner, and how does that work? And that can be for Per or for anybody that wants to chime in on that.
Well, the commissioners are the actual members of General Assembly. We tend to talk about General Assembly as the whole church, but it's technically really only those who have been commissioned to be there. And the commissioners who can be a commissioner is every teaching elder of the PCA is eligible. And then for ruling elders, they have to be sent by their church. Each church can send two, up to, if they have up to 350 communing members. And then they get an additional one for every 500 or fraction of 500 members after that.
Yeah, and that's BCO 14.2. So it's always nice to have somebody that's written a commentary on the BCO just to answer random questions. So we should have done a quiz show at the very beginning. But why do they need to register?
Because of 14.4. Each commissioner, before his name shall be enrolled, shall produce appropriate credentials. You got to prove you're supposed to be there.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Never thought I'd use that one for anything.
All right. After that, on the schedule, it shows that there starts to be briefings, because some of the first things that are happening, some of the first meetings that are happening are these things that are called the Committee of Commissioners. And that includes something that's called overtures as well. We're going to do overtures in a little bit more detail later when we get further along in the schedule. But how do we explain what a Committee of Commissioners is, and how does it work?
Scott's been awfully quiet. I mean, not that I don't want Per to speak to this either, but we have to poke the bear a little bit.
Yeah, so the Committee of Commissioners, they tend to work as perhaps a review and control for the permanent committees. And so they do various works depending what's assigned to them. The main work for most of them, though, is reviewing the permanent committees' minutes and approving their budgets. Sometimes the overtures will be referred to some of these Committee of Commissioners, depending on the jurisdiction of that overture. Say if there's a change to a presbytery border, that would go through MNA's permanent committee and then the COC as it approves it. But they basically work as review and control for the permanent committees to ensure that everything is done in decent and good order as the permanent committees meet and do the work of the church throughout the year.
Yeah, and what sort of committees are those? Like, if I'm looking on the list, can I go review the SJC because I got mad that they did something I didn't like?
Some people try.
Well, I thought this was maybe for Per, since you've had some experience with that. Who reviews the SJC if the Committee of Commissioners isn't?
That's good.
So the SJC brings, on one level, doesn't get reviewed. Its minutes do get reviewed, that it's following the proper procedures. That's done by the Committee on Constitutional Business. but its actions, its decisions are not. They're reported to the General Assembly, but as a commission and not a committee, their action is final, and it is the action of the Assembly.
Yeah. So, well, one of the other things to think about, though, too, in this is if you're going to go to a committee of commissioners, why should you? Why is it important? And maybe I can just throw this out of you are reviewing minutes for somebody that has for a committee that has done some important work. There's recommendations that they make, and sometimes those get tweaked or something like that. And sometimes you'll find something in the minutes that they neglected to do, and we'll inform them on that. And sometimes they actually thank you for it. I remember being in a committee of commissioners once where they found that they hadn't done something properly in terms of how they reported out their financials. And their report was just like, thanks for catching that. We're going to correct that. And so a lot of times it's not a matter of a hostile environment of the committee of commissioners versus the committee. But if somebody is thinking about getting on a committee of commissioners for the first time, sell it to them. Why should they do that?
Well, they should do it because all of the business from those committees or agencies comes to the Assembly through the Committee of Commissioners. The permanent committees, the agencies can't bring business directly to the Assembly. They can only bring it to the Committee of Commissioners, and it's on the Committee of Commissioners then to review and examine that, and then they bring it before. And so, this is where the Assembly can get more information from its committees and its agencies than is possible out on the floor with 2,000 guys sitting in on the meeting.
Yeah, and it's pretty unique in the PCA, isn't it? I don't know of any other denominations that have committees of commissioners. Did you encounter that in doing your work on the commentary pair?
I don't think any others do. Like the OPC has a delegated assembly, so things can come more directly because the assembly as a whole operates very much as a committee of commissioners, and so it allows them to do things the size of our assembly, and the fact that one of those preliminary principles for the assembly found in BCO 14.1 is that our committees do not direct policy; they only enact it. They carry out what the assembly has said. They don't have any authority in themselves to set the policy, and so. As a precaution, the PCA has that level of those committees of commissioners to exercise more control over their committees.
Yeah.
Is it if well, let me back up. I have often heard people reflect on committee of commissioners as just rubber stamps. There's really no point in having a committee of commissioners. They just come in and these guys present all the work that they've done as a committee or a permanent agency in the last year. There's really nothing you can change. There's no effect that a committee of commissioners can have. And regardless of where we might fall in agreeing with what COCs have done in the last few years, we have seen in the last several years that they have stepped up and tried to take action, and correct some things that the commissioners thought needed to be corrected or adjust some operating manuals. And so I think we've seen lately, maybe for the first time in a while, that COCs actually have good work to do. And it's important work that they're doing. And so that's one reason to get on a COC if somebody's asking.
So what should they expect when they show up? What sort of work are they going to do at that meeting? Should they come packing a lunch because they're going to be there a while, or what sort of work are they actually going to do when they show up to that meeting?
It certainly depends on the COC on the depth of work. When you get into perhaps the AC, that does probably a little more work in that meeting than perhaps Ridgehaven or something akin to it. And so it depends on the committee that you're on, the depth of work you will do in that meeting, because there are not a lot of recommendations that typically come out of certain COCs. And so some, again, the general work is you'll probably be split up into 2 or 3 groups. One group in that COC will review the finances, another will review the minutes, and then another might do the overtures or something of that nature that are referred to it. And then usually the committee as a whole will reconvene and take the recommendations based on those subcommittees within the COC and debate the recommendations and make alterations or approve them or reject them. And so some of them are, it can be really long. A few years ago, I was the secretary for the AC COC, and the meeting was 3.5, 4 hours. It was ridiculous. And typically, and people were surprised because it typically isn't that long, and they're typically not that long unless you're on the overtures. But most of them typically are an hour and a half, 2 hours, unless you get some crazy overtures or recommendations that might take the committee longer to work through. So there's no limit. It could be as long as until the assembly convenes, but that's typically the scope.
I've been on COCs that were like 45 minutes, so it could be very short.
AC was crazy last year. It was.
Well, where would you then suggest, say somebody has, maybe it's their first time at GA, or maybe it's their second or third time, but they've never done a COC before, and they're looking at the list in their presbytery. Where would you suggest they start? Is there a good place to start, or maybe a place that you shouldn't jump in your first time?
You should probably pick one that you can attend. I'm not traveling till Monday this year, and so I won't be able to go to any of the Monday ones. And so I had to find the ones that were meeting on Tuesday and pick one of those. So pay attention to the schedule. That's significant depending on when you're going to be moving in the directions.
So timing.
Thank you. Timing. That's what I meant.
The AC is probably not the one to start with.
Yeah.
As you guys have said, that one can tend to get a little longer and a little more involved in things. My suggestion would be go one of two ways. Either start with one that's of personal interest.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, really interested in missions, and that's a big emphasis for you in your ministry, then perhaps MTW might be a good one to start, because you'll have more more ownership in what's going on. Or you could, what I did when I first started is I picked one that I knew little about and said, I know little about what goes on over here. Let me learn a little bit. In my case, that was, I started with the IRC. That was my first one, I think, many years ago, and said, okay, I don't really know what they do. Let me go and find out and sit and hear and engage.
Yeah, or PCA Foundation or Geneva Benefits. Those are great ones to go to say, I have no idea what you guys do. How are you a committee? What do you guys do? And then you learn something about, hey, you can help us with setting up payments, or you can help with retirement, and you can learn something from that. Yeah, OC would probably not be a good one to start on either, unless you've seen it work before. But speaking of, after you get to your committee of commissioners, you're done. It's either, maybe Monday before lunch, or maybe it's Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning or something like that. What do you suggest doing until worship starts on Tuesday? What should a good churchman do in between the end of his COC and the beginning of worship service?
Find the ice cream social if it's happening at that point. You really need to figure out where that's going to be.
I think our sponsor today is the ice cream social.
Listen, I'm just trying to get it said as many times in these several weeks as I possibly can. If you're not Pear, you might not be familiar. We've talked about the ice cream social a lot already, so just trying to keep the momentum. Yeah.
I think what I tend to do, at least when I'm at the assembly early, is if I have some free time that's during the day, I typically sit in on and off of the overtures committee. Since I'm not on the committee, I don't feel the necessity to just sit there for 10 hours every day, but popping in and out, having a friend text you, hey, they're debating something that is pretty substantial, you might want to listen to it. That's helpful because it will frame the discussion likely moving into the assembly. Sometimes when you're involved in the pre-assembly, by the time the assembly happens, the assembly in some ways feels over. And it's not that the business is done, but you've heard a lot of the discussion, you know what people are thinking, and generally the trajectory of the debates, the minority reports and such. And so if you have some free time, sitting in on the Overtures Committee helps prepare you for the assembly proper and the direction that the assembly will likely go. The assembly doesn't always follow step for step with the Overtures Committee, but it gives you a general sense and prepares you for what you're about to receive. And so when you're debating recommendation 7, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard some discussion on this when I sat in on the overtures. And so if there's some free time between having lunch and hanging out with friends, sitting in on the overtures committee is good.
Yeah, if I could just give a recommendation, especially if it's right before lunch, go to lunch with people on your committee of commissioners. These are people you're probably not going to meet in any other format, and people from around the country. And it's fascinating to hear from other teaching elders and ruling elders what's going on in their churches. So it's a unique opportunity to interact with those people. If people want more details on that, in RAO 14 is way more detailed than we're getting into about what happens on the Committee of Commissioners.
Jared,
But something
what's the RAO?
That's the rules of assembly operation. Those are those
Where can I
yellow
find
pages.
it? Yeah, okay.
Those are those yellow pages at the back of the BCO.
Thanks.
But I was particularly interested having somebody that maybe is doing some things in between the COC and the Gavel. You might have had some opportunity to see some of the work that happens in between there. What else is happening, maybe behind the scenes or set up? I don't know if there's anything that you've seen pair with being a parliamentarian and timekeeper with some of the preparation that goes on Monday and Tuesday before the Gavel that we don't see.
Well, yeah, there's a lot that's going on. Every one of those COCs prepares a report, which has to then get taken to the office and then distributed out, so all the commissioners have a chance to see that. In years past, they would print them on varying colored paper, to pass out at the time. Now everything gets posted onto the share file, so you can have it as soon as they're prepared and actually see it before it comes to the floor. So there's a lot of work that goes on there, just making sure that all of that information is distributed out to all of the commissioners. The floor clerks, who are the ones that used to distribute all of it and still take paper copies around for those who need and do their work, they're preparing, they're figuring out their sections and working out the details so that they can be efficient. They're there as servants of the commissioners to help the assembly run smoothly. So you see a lot of those pieces. And then there's just a lot of communication back and forth between the various committees and agencies, the committees of commissioners, overtures, what's going on in the different pieces that overlap and play into. And by that point, as you noted, Jared, you're starting to see kind of what the business is going to be of the assembly and where things are, and so the stated clerk and the others, the parliamentarians, are starting to just prepare themselves for where they think the issues are going to be, where the emotions are going to be, what the questions that are likely to come up are, so that they're prepared to give the answers and don't have to do everything off the top of their heads, because everybody makes mistakes and none of us have all of Roberts and the BCO and the RAO memorized.
There's a few people that I would suspect that they might have some of them, but yes, maybe not all of it. Well, to start to wrap up a little bit on this, I wanted to ask you just a few questions to get a little bit either of your personality or what you tend to do at GA, and then maybe some final tips. But first, I'm just going to ask you 3 questions here. First, do you have any kind of a favorite GA memory that you would want to share, Per?
I think most of my favorite memories of GA are things around the business. There's certainly highlights, things like the Indelible Grace concerts, both in Nashville this past year and then at the Ryman Auditorium back in 2010. I love listening to the sermons, and for as great as as the big names are, Ligon, Duncan, and Joe Nobinson, and the others that they often have preached. I particularly enjoy when they ask one of the local RUF campus ministers, or somebody that I have no idea who they are, and getting a chance to just sit and hear the word proclaimed by somebody that is not one of the highlights. And in fact, my church, we have a practice. We've done this for years. We actually take the videos and we use them and watch them as a church throughout the following year, as a way of trying to connect the church into the larger PCA and hear
Now,
what
now
it
is this the worship services, or do you do the floor debates?
So just the worship services,
Okay.
just the sermons. Yeah,
He's not a monster, Jared.
Yes. So it's those conversations. You mentioned having lunch with other guys and hearing what God is doing in other parts of the church. And those are my favorite memories of General Assembly.
All right. Then a second question here is a little less serious. What's been your favorite swag that you've gotten from GA? So if people don't know, you go into the exhibit hall and sometimes you can get free stuff, t-shirts, mugs, things like that. So have you ever come out with your favorite piece of swag from GA Pair?
It's a very serious question, Jared. Don't sell yourself short. That's very important.
Everybody walks out with the big bags and the armfuls of all of the stuff. I think my favorite being I mentioned my father was Air Force, I was Air Force, my brother was Air Force. I've got a son in the Air Force now. So I always have to stop by the Air Force chaplains. And being a prior service guy, I've walked away with a sweatshirt and workout shirt and other things. And I love having those. When my kids were younger, they always liked to see what the new Covenant College shirt for the year was. And I think my wife misses the old MTW mugs, where every year MTW had a different mug highlighting some different area and region that they were serving. And she always liked to see that, and the various teas from that region or that tied in some way. Yep. But the Air Force.
Yep. And then the final question then is, any final tips for preparation for GA that people don't often think about?
I had somebody early on, I couldn't even tell you who told me one of the things they did every year was they read through the RAO again. Those rules for assembly options, because most of the year we ignore those yellow pages at the back of the BCO. They don't really impact what Presbytery does, what our sessions do. And the only time they come up really is, for most people, is that week. And so just a reminder, this is what's allowed. You don't even have to read the chapters on the stated clerk's office and stuff, but the chapters on the Committee of Commissioners and on the Overtures Committee, and these things that lay out and remind, okay, here's what's allowed, here's how this will be handled. Now you can add to that, Jacob Gerber has a wonderful little resource, Parliamentary Procedure for Presbyters, I think it's called, which gives a wonderful just overview, because General Assembly is more formal in its procedures than most of our presbyteries, certainly mine, but I'm in a small one where there's usually fewer than 20 of us at a meeting. But it's more formal, and to be reminded of the process and the things we don't normally follow and why. And then the other is, you read the overtures and stuff, but talk with others. Talk with other guys in your, on your session, in your presbytery, especially guys with a different viewpoint, to begin to hear how others are. Scott, I think you mentioned sitting in on the OC and hearing, the major points of debate. You can often start to hear those ahead of time when you start to talk to others who come from a different perspective, and read the things a little differently. And it gives you time to think and to process and to pray through it before you get there. And now you're on the floor and it's late at night and we're all just really wanting to end for the day. And or Thursday night, we're all trying to end, before midnight so that we don't have to come back Friday morning.
Well, before we ask you about if there's anything you want to plug or where people find you, Ben, Scott, do you have any final questions or remarks on this section?
I just want to say how grateful I am for your letting us have access to your doctoral work, and want to say how excited I am about the whole thing coming out later this year. Because several times, not for the podcast, I'll go and look in the Almquist PDF I have and be like, I wonder what he says on this. But it turns out I'm in the rules for discipline. I'm like, oh, nuts. No longer, Lord willing, after December. Can't wait.
That's okay. I used to do the same. When once the dissertation was done, I feel like, man, I wish I had had whatever on those parts too. So that was part of what led to it all. I'm glad it's been helpful. That was the goal, was a resource not just for me, but something for the church.
Will your resource be digital too, so that it's perhaps easy to search?
We haven't had that conversation yet. I certainly was very appreciative when Greenville released the PDF of Morton Smith's, for that very reason. So I'm certainly open to it, but right now the focus has just been getting it available, and then we'll have that conversation.
Yeah.
Will it come in a binder format, or will we bind it traditionally?
So that was one of the things when we had the initial conversation. They said, "Hey, do you have any thoughts on its binding?" I said, "Not a binder."
It's gonna look so weird next to my BCO and my Morton Smith on my shelf.
Well, I have to admit, I went and I actually spiral bound my Morton Smith so that it wouldn't fall out and everything, and would lay flat, so it was easier to carry around before that PDF came out.
Great idea.
In light of that, will you then be revising your commentary moving forward?
That's the plan. We haven't figured out. It won't be an annual one. You just can't publish. People aren't going to buy a whole new one, and unless you do the 3-ring binder, and start selling change packets, there's no convenient way to do that.
Some of us might, just for what it's worth.
Yeah.
The subscription is how you get the retirement fund built up.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know. There's I don't really want to be put in the same breath with HP and their printers that they now disable if you don't subscribe and stuff. But yes, the idea is that not to let it get too far out. And Morton Smith's was last revised in 2007, and that's a long time. We average 16 amendments proposed every General Assembly in the 10 years after that, and I think we average approving 4 of them every year, and that builds up, and those make changes. So
that's why we can't be like the OPC and bind our Book of Church Order either.
Well, it used to be back in the 19th century, they would revise it about once a generation, every 20 years or so. And there's a lot of quotes from the leaders at that time, Thornwell, Cortland, von Cortland, and others, that their people wouldn't accept the Book of Church Order being amended more frequently than that. And I think there's something to say for, we may have gone a little too far the other way. I don't know that I believe in not changing it but once every 20 years, but there are things that need to be fixed, but maybe 16 every year is a little much.
It's funny, Howie said the same thing, but I was like, Howie, you're the one that's done like half of the change proposals. Well, maybe we can have you on again if you're open to it. When it gets closer to publication time, we can have more of an in-depth conversation about that, because you can tell we're excited about it. But before Ben takes us out, is there anything that you want to plug? Is there a place that people can find anything that you work on in terms of resources online, or would you prefer people don't look you up?
No, I'm always happy to answer any questions. People can, just find, I'm on our church's website, or, I'm the stated clerk for Northern New England. So if you just go to the AC site and look up the list of presbyteries, So I'm not hard to find, at all. And, having a name that's unusual in the U.S., Googling works pretty well to get a hold of. But that's what it's about. It's about, the church moving forward and seeing the kingdom advance.
Jared's giving me the look. As every committee of commissioners would say, this podcast is over. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to come back next time when we continue walking through the week of General Assembly with our moderator and yours, the Reverend Fred Greco. If you're interested in learning more about anything that we mentioned, be sure to check out the show notes in your podcast player or at politymatters.org. Another huge thank you to our guest today, Per Almquist. We were excited to have you. We're glad to have it finished, but looking forward to having you back, Lord willing. If listeners, if you enjoyed the show, consider following us on Twitter or Facebook at Polity Matters, and be sure to subscribe in your podcast app of choice, and you'll get these episodes delivered fresh every Tuesday morning. If you've got questions or comments you'd like to send to us, you can contact us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com, or you can find any one of us on Twitter. Just check the show notes for links to those places. Thanks again for spending your time with us. Until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Bye, gentlemen.
Adios.
Bye.
Y'all take care.